That's Enough Out of You podcast is sponsored by Todd John's Law. Unfortunately, bad things happen to good people, whether it's the result of an auto accident caused by the carelessness of another driver or being charged with a crime. Dealing with the aftermath of a personal injury accident or being involved with the criminal justice system can be extremely difficult. That's why, whatever you're facing, you should never go it alone. You need an experienced attorney who will stand by you every step of the way. Todd is experienced, licensed, trusted, respected, and guaranteed. No one will work harder or more diligently on your behalf, and he will personally handle your case from beginning to end. Located on Drinker Street in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, Todd has been representing the legal rights of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre personal injury victims and those accused of a crime for over 20 years. At Todd John's Law, the utmost priority is ensuring that your rights are always protected and that your case is resolved as quickly and fairly as possible so that you can move on with your life. Call Todd John's Law at 570-876-6903. With Todd John's Law, you will receive equal justice under the law. That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Casa Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Casa Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events. Now serving a full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Casa Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy and karaoke nights and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. And if you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off of your order. Located on Main Street in Peckville, Pennsylvania, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Casa Quattro Winery for their support. All right, hey there, and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. Or should I say that's enough out of you?
Tube.
I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me, as he always does, each and every week is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean,
Billy Raids. How you doing, buddy?
You recovered from our wild night out last night?
Yeah, we went to one of our sponsors last night, Casa Quattro, and we met up with Sammy Sebastianelli and Marty Kane, and had a good time there. Great place, great beer, great atmosphere, great wine, great food, great entertainment, really good band that was there.
Yeah.
Great times.
Yeah, it was good. It was the first time I've been out like that in quite a while, so it was nice to kind of relax and have a little bit of fun. And
I found a new Sam Adams, an IPA, really good IPA that he had.
Yeah, really cool place he's got there. Casa Quattro. Like I said, if you're in the area in Northeast Pennsylvania, definitely stop by there, check it out. Excellent everything, food, drink, entertainment. Really good place to go. Sean, we've got a great guest today.
Tremendous guest.
Bruce the Torres joins us. Bruce, how are you?
I am honored and excited to be with you both again.
We're thrilled to have you, Bruce. All right, Sean, I know you had a couple topics you wanted to get into before.
Yeah, before we get into, stuff we want to talk with Bruce, just a little rant here, Bruce, if you could just bear with me.
Sure.
YouTube, it's just disgusting what they do to anybody, and it's not just our podcast. It's any podcast that tries to tell the truth about certain things the government does or whatever, the official story. It goes against the official story. They put these stupid disclaimers up there. I mean, I was going through videos the other day, everything basically that Jim D'Eugenio or Lisa Pease or anybody like that, a respected researcher that's doing good work, all their work is disclaimers on there. And the same thing with ours. We do something on Oswald and they put a Wikipedia disclaimer saying official story, with the Warren Commission fairy tale. And then, they got our views on there. And listen, it doesn't affect us because we know we got a pretty good audience, and YouTube is only one of like 30 outlets that we're on. I mean, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, we do real good on their Heartland. So YouTube is just one outlet. But the thing is, it's disrespectful to, we have guests on. We had a great guest a couple weeks ago, Professor Mark Brennan, talking about the north of Ireland and the problems over there. And his episode got gutted. I mean, it's still okay. It's doing okay on YouTube. But thing is, we're like 20,000 views on YouTube. We should be like 80,000 that they just got views. And this is their algorithm program. It runs against, you know, podcasts that are trying to tell the truth, trying to anything that goes against the official story, and they come out with this. They say it's a bot program, but it's an algorithm program designed in targeting, truth tellers, and that's a disgusting thing, and it's corporate America at its worst. So I want to get that off my chest and a little rant, and if you guys want to comment on that, have at it.
Well, I concur. Sean, you're suffering this with the podcast here. Your thoughts? Bill, rather, sorry.
Or Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's tough because we put in a lot of work on this podcast, not just the obvious stuff, but also a lot of research and working to get guests and putting in, we put in a lot of time, and we appreciate the listeners that we have. We appreciate the fan base that we have. And I don't know anything about whether or not the views are legitimate views that they're just taking away, or if they're, bots or whatever it is. I don't know any of the technical stuff. Right. But it does piss me off when I look and see that, we've got 500 views on our YouTube, on one of our YouTube episodes on a Thursday night. And then I look again Friday afternoon or whenever whenever they run that program, and it's down to like, 300 something. Like, how does that happen?
It doesn't. And it's, like the one I talked about, Mark Brennan. I mean, he had more views in the first hour than he had when I checked it on Saturday night. That's how bad it was. It went down. Like in the one we had with Rick Otto a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, that got it unbelievable. I mean, they must have took 1,000 views from that. And Rick is the one that pointed this out. He sent me the video that's actually been taken down on YouTube, but it was a person who designed the algorithm program. The person designed it. And he was talking about it, how, it's designed to do things like that and to kind of, distract and it's like an intel tactic, distract the truth tellers and get them to back off and things like that. But there's little things like that's not going to bother us because, again, we don't have this problem with Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or any of the other ones, the 30 applications we're on. Right. We don't have a problem with that. But when we do start doing videos, then, it might become a problem. We might have to look elsewhere.
Well, and then the thing that pisses you off, Sean, is that, YouTube is they're running ads
right
on our show.
Right.
If we had, a certain number of views, they would have to, we'd have to monetize.
And we don't make any money on YouTube. It's the only one we don't make money on.
Not a cent. So we put it on there. We put it on there because we know a lot of our fans like to watch or listen on YouTube. And that's really the only reason. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother with them. But what are you going to do? This is life. This is, YouTube's got you by the balls, essentially. There's no other place to go, if you want that mass distribution.
So before we get into some of the topics here, Bruce, do you got anything you want to comment on that? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, just the number of truth tellers who have been booted off of YouTube or can't tolerate it and have gone to BitChute and Rumble. And you guys are well aware of those, and maybe you're on those as well, or you will be. And that's great. And just the sadness of this YouTube example proving the 1984 by George Orwell that we live in, and to never stop ranting about it, because we've got to hope against hope that the more people who learn it and get outraged and talk about it, good things could happen. That's about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's disgusting, Bruce. It really is. It's
Mhm.
corporate America at its worst, and the government, doing what they want to do, and the official story's there to protect the officials, right, Billy?
Hmm.
That's it. That's what Jesse the Body said.
Yeah, and
Jesse the Governor.
to prevent more truth coming out. Speaking of truth, Monica Wisak was on my show 2 weeks ago, around February 18th, not 1 week ago.
Okay. And we're gonna have an episode coming up this week with Monica, and we're gonna have her back. I mean, she's always a great guest.
Yeah.
Um, but Bruce, I want to get into there's a lot of topics I want to talk to tonight. I want to definitely, we're going to talk about JFK. But I do want to talk about RFK Jr. Because I know you're a big backer of his, and I want to get out to let you say what you want about him. But here's what I want to say, Bruce. And on this show, we tried as hard as we can to keep the politics out of it, and not get into this, back and forth. And I'll tell you, I've about had it up to my ears with this stuff. And the one thing I want to say is, the people that are out there that said, I can't vote Democrat or this and that, so that's why I voted Trump. Well, the thing is, now you have a choice. You have a clear choice in RFK Jr. You have other choices. You have Nikki Haley. You have other choices besides Trump. So I don't want to hear that you don't have a choice. You have to vote for Trump. Otherwise, just admit you're in a cult. Because to me, and I stayed quiet, Bruce. I didn't get involved in any of this back and forth with Trump, this and that. But to me, the guy's got no campaign this time. Like last time, at least he had, things he was going to do with the wall and migrants and stuff and the immigration problem. But now it's to me is like his only goal is when I become president again, he says, I'm going to get back at all the people that talked about me and said things about me. And I'm going to use the military and the intel services to get back at them. And that, to me, that's extremely dangerous because we talk about on the show about how, you know, the military in the intelligence community covertly used assassinations to get rid of people like JFK, RFK, MLK. This guy's talking about overtly using them, and he's just going to weaponize them and go after anybody who called them names. So if you vote for the guy, then let's hope that he don't turn on you like he turns on everybody else and uses the military to come after you. So to me, it's like the people that said I didn't have a choice because I can't stand Biden, I can't stand Obama, I can't stand Hillary, so I
Yeah.
voted for Trump. Now you have a choice. You have a
Mm.
choice in RFK Jr. So I wanted to give you a chance, and Billy, if you want to comment on what I just said, but I want you to talk about RFK Jr., how he could be a choice for the people that said they have no choice, because that's bull now. You
Yeah.
have a choice.
Yeah. Those kind of observations about Trump, I've heard from people that I have dismissed just as suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. Are you saying you have heard him yourself say those kind of things?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt I heard him say that.
Okay, well that
Yeah,
that
I've heard him say that. I mean, and
that
listen, that's
I was gonna look into that. I believe you. No, I was gonna look into that because I couldn't believe these very credible sounding people who are terrified of him
well, this is
coming
all he
back
talks
in.
about though, Bruce. Every time
Well,
I hear
I
him on
haven't.
TV, all I hear him
Yeah.
talking about is I'm getting back at the people who call me names. That's all I hear him
Well,
say.
he's so in my rearview mirror, frankly, up till now I haven't paid attention to what he's been saying lately because I'm
Right.
focused on the future and I'm hoping for Kennedy. But that is very satisfying to hear from the likes of you, Sean, because that makes Kennedy's candidacy all the more important.
Well, and again, Bruce, I don't care.
Mm.
Like, if somebody votes Republican, they vote Democrat. I don't care who you vote for, but just
Mm.
know what you're voting for. You know what I mean? And don't
Uh,
tell me you don't have a choice, because you always have a choice. And clearly, RFK Jr. is a choice.
and the great impression I have, which is great news, is his campaign constantly posts different and new polls that show him, if not competitive, leading. And here's other good news. To watch the mainstream, we would think the country's divided in half, Republicans and Democrats. Not so. For for many, 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 many years, polls have shown Americans identify about 25% Republican, about 25% Democrat, leaving 50% who either are just don't care because it's such a clown act, and it has been for years, much more so in the last 4 to 8 years. And that's whom Kennedy supporters need to reach to put him over the top in a tidal wave by voters who appreciate he's not a conspiracy theory lunatic like he's being painted by his competition.
Well, Bruce, we know the mainstream media totally locked him out and didn't allow him to give his voice on there, and they totally blocked him out. So the polls, they're not even going to reflect him as even running. So they're not even going to acknowledge him whatsoever. The polls, I'm talking the mainstream media polls.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But the ones he's releasing, which I'll give him the presumption of believing that they're accurate, and I don't know him to be a liar in any way, shape, or form, are thrilling as the possibility right now. Bill, what do you think about all that, Bill Rader?
So you want to know what I thought? I'm thrilled that we do finally have a legitimate third party candidate, because we have been a two-party system for so long, and it has been I think I remember something. We mentioned Jesse Ventura before, and somebody had asked him during the 2016 campaign what he thought, about if Hillary won, that, the White House would be essentially controlled by three families for, 30 plus years. And he said, what's more disturbing to me is that the White House has been, controlled by two parties for the last 200 years. And that's, to me, that's the most disturbing thing. But, and I know, Bruce, you've said Donald Trump is in your rear view, and boy, I certainly hope he is, because if he gets elected, I don't see good things happening. The people who support him, they are in a cult, Sean. You're absolutely right. It's not about politics. It's nothing to do with politics. Forget the fact. I mean, this guy was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. He's a draft dodger. All of his businesses have failed miserably. He's a liar. He's a con man. He's a lifelong Democrat who really only ran for president to feed his massive ego. And he ran as a Republican because he knew the only way he could get elected was to pander to the religious right wing.
See, that's the thing. Like, let me just interrupt real quick. Like, if you're a Republican conservative, Bruce and Bill, and you really believe in conservative values and stuff, Trump's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. He's a used car salesman.
Right.
So I don't have, I just don't. And listen, we try to keep the politics out of this, but I just had it. Maybe the shoes put me over the edge. Paying $400 for shoes. I mean, why don't you give that money to cancer research or do something good? Or it's just, to me, it's just like. But again, go ahead, Bill. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. But it's absolutely, it has nothing to do with politics for these people that support him. It's about, they don't want immigrants coming into this country. They don't want gay people getting married. They don't want women to have the same rights as men. They don't want Black Lives Matter. They don't want trans people or non-binary people. They don't want Black people or immigrants on welfare. They don't want, fancy book learning in schools. They don't want free healthcare, government programs to help, poor people or disenfranchised. And the fact of the matter is, most of his supporters are poor or disenfranchised. They're people who can't afford good healthcare, or even if they could, they don't live anywhere near where they could get good healthcare. They're hardworking, blue collar people who just aren't well educated and could benefit from having better schools. But here is the ugly truth. Is that Trump hates the same people that they hate. So he's their champion. He's the hero of the bigots and the ignorant people. And he feeds into their fears that, immigrants are coming to take your jobs away, when that's just not true. Immigrants are coming here to do the jobs that most lazy Americans would never do, like picking fruit, washing dishes, roofing, working, long hours for less than minimum wage. And most of the money they send back to their families anyway to feed them. But, he feeds into this narrative that, it's these, lazy people, lazy Black people who are on, getting food stamps and not working. And the truth is that that's just not true. really the same percentage of white people and black people receive food stamps. And you guys know who, by race, the highest percentage of people who get public assistance are? Take a guess. It's Native Americans. What does that tell you? Those are the people we fucked more than anybody else in this country. And it's taken them hundreds of years to recover, and they're still not recovered.
Mm-hmm.
But Trump, he feeds into this narrative that the Democrats, oh, they're coming to take your guns away. Well, here's a direct quote from Trump. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. To go to court would have taken a long time. That's what he said in 2018 when he was president. I mean, the fact is Democrats have only proposed sensible gun laws, but Trump and the Republicans love to scare people. Oh, they're coming to take your guns away, and it's all bullshit. And the fact is, this guy, his ego has become just so damaged and hurt by these lawmakers who are loyal to the Constitution, not to him, by not letting him do whatever he wanted. So now he, like you said, Sean, he's becoming this like fascist dictator. And believe me, you think he did whatever he could do to hang on to power the first time. Just wait until his term is up in 2028, because he doesn't give two shits about his supporters or the Constitution or democracy. And these staged videos of him taking, what was it, like $20 out of his pocket to put in a donation basket. It's comical. So
let me ask you this.
Go ahead.
You have, and Bruce, let me direct this to you, because you have Trump's base. You know, them people are going to vote for Trump no matter what. He could do whatever he wants, say what he wants. And then, and the flip side of that, you're going to have the same people that are going to vote Democrat no matter what. And they're going to, and that's that. There's, you know, but you're going to have that, you know, undecided, or maybe people that did vote for Trump, or they voted Democrat last time, and this time they want to change. They're not sure. Maybe they're on the fence. How does RFK Jr. reach those people? Because the bases, I think the bases are there, and they're not going to change. I don't think, I mean, maybe you have a different opinion on that, but I don't think RFK is going to reach the base of Trump's people or the base of Biden's people. I think it's the people on the fence that he has to reach. What do you think about that?
He's very specific in the numbers of people that he has to reach in order to win. He's the kind of Kennedy, like his uncle and like his father, that loves to compete and loves to win. So it's really fascinating as a character study to see this incarnation of that kind of competitive zeal that I admired so much in his father and his uncle. So he's very articulate in explaining the numbers that he has to hit in order to win. And he's also very articulate in explaining, he's trying to tell the truth about our problems and recommend obviously compelling solutions. And that's what he's doing about all issues across the board. And except for his blind support of Israel, I think his positions on all of the things we've talked about so far are brilliant, because they're commonsensical, they're heart-centered, and they are radical, because his entire program becomes possible if he's allowed to become president and shrink the military, our empire's evil overreach and meddling, not only into other countries, but into our lives very, very deeply as a very, very evil force. So Kennedy is well articulating, and that's how he's going to win enough to win from Trump's supporters, from Trump's base, from Biden's base. Back to immigration for a second. There are a lot of people who are politically neutral, who used to be independent or used to be whatever, who are now they're ostracized. So I call them independent, like Naomi Wolf and her platform dailyclout.io, and a couple of people around her who are experts on the immigration system. One of them is a podcaster now on that platform named JJ Carroll, who was a border agent for many, many years. And he has, I think, recently written a book, and now he's interviewed all the time about his conviction that of the many millions who have been let in over the last couple of years, the enormous percentage of them that are that are proven criminals and very likely military age, who all seem to fit a profile of the dark intent. That's speculation, but he mounts the evidence that we have a huge problem that's well beyond just well-meaning people, Bill, who need to come here to make a living and do the work and the jobs that otherwise wouldn't get done. I'm all for that, but if he's accurate about that, the level of that problem. So that's just one burning
Well, Bruce, let me
problem.
ask you this. So the immigration's been a problem for a long time. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But Bill mentioned this before in the show, and he said, and I agree with him. Don't you think that these people wouldn't be leaving these countries if the CIA didn't meddle in their affairs years ago? And when you look at a lot of these coups that they had in places like Guatemala and Brazil
Absolutely.
and all over the world, and it was created 100% by Alan Dulles, and he started this mess.
Absolutely.
And it goes to the fact that these people wouldn't be fleeing these countries if the mess said that Dulles and these guys and Rockefeller and all these guys left in these countries. The Congo's a mess. I mean, it's just you can just pick a country. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, they meddled in everybody's affairs.
I lay the majority of the world's problems at the feet of the United States,
Yes.
which really lays it at our feet, because we, the people, have let our government become so captured over generations. And yet I don't want to be too hard on ourselves, because it's human nature. When you look at the rise and fall of countries and empires as far back as we have records, this is a natural progression. And Anton Chaikin is a historian who just the other night did a live Zoom, and hopefully he'll post the link soon, about, Sean, what you just described, our horrible imperial catastrophes and destructions that we have wrought, colonizing and exploiting and taking advantage of and squeezing to sickness and to death so many countries around the world.
Yes.
And not only South America. Back to Kennedy, he, over the last year, went down to the border to investigate what's going on. And one of his first reports was, we saw almost nobody from South and Central America come across the border. These hundreds that came over in the middle of the night that we got to mingle with and find out about are from the Middle East. They're from African countries. They're from East Europe.
Right.
The
countries where the U.S. have meddled in.
Yeah, after the 90s, what we did in the Yugoslavia area, and also after the war on terror. What happened in Europe with the influx of millions of refugees, creating chaos on the streets that justified harsh police crackdowns. We got a taste of that in the summer of 2020 with the Black Lives Matter riots that erupted. And we haven't had a fraction of problems in the street from crime, from the illegal aliens that are here compared to their numbers. And God forbid they are orchestrated at a queue. I don't speculate about bad conspiracy things like that happening, but I am ready for catastrophic collapses and false flags that justify a martial law crackdown of epic proportions. And my bottom line, and it's early in the conversation to say this, but is to really work on one's own self and one's own head, and get right with your maker, get good with your God. And like that poem by Rudyard Kipling, if you can keep your head when all around you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, and this, that, and the other thing, you'll be a man, my son. We have to be ready for the stuff to hit the fan any second.
And we will be right back. We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, Residence Inn by Marriott in Scranton. Discover comfort and convenience in Scranton. If you're planning a short or extended stay in the Scranton, Pennsylvania area, Residence Inn by Marriott, located at 947 Viewmont Drive, will ensure your stay is nothing short of exceptional. Their friendly team is committed to providing you with top-notch service and a memorable experience. Whether you're in town for business, leisure, or a bit of both, Residence Inn Scranton has you covered. They offer free Wi-Fi, an indoor pool, meeting and event space, complimentary hot breakfast, a fitness center, and an on-site market. And Residence Inn Scranton is pet friendly. Your home away from home. Residence Inn Scranton features spacious studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom suites, and all are complete with a fully equipped kitchen. There's a cozy fireplace lounge and an outdoor barbecue area. Call 570-343-5121 or go to Marriott.com for more information. Residence Inn Scranton, where hospitality meets home. That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Fairfield Inn by Marriott. Located at 949 Viewmont Drive in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Fairfield Inn Scranton exemplifies travel made easy. They offer stylish guest rooms with plush bedding, complimentary hot breakfast with healthy options, one of the area's premier hotel fitness centers, as well as nearby dining options. While you're staying at Fairfield Scranton, make sure you check out some local attractions like the Scranton Cultural Center, the Electric City Trolley Museum, Montage Mountain Resorts, and the Steamtown National Historic Site. Catch a Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins game or a concert at the Mohegan Sun Arena, or take the historic Lackawanna Coal Mine tour. Fairfield Inn Scranton is in the center of it all. Experience comfort and convenience in Scranton at the Fairfield Inn by Marriott. Call 570-343-5121 or go to Marriott.com for more information. Fairfield Inn Scranton, where hospitality meets home.
Bruce, let me ask you something about, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned the situation in Palestine with Israel. I think at this point, anybody who could look at that situation now, I mean, I don't see how you can't see what Israel's doing is really genocide. I mean, they're just annihilating civilians there. And this is one thing that, RFK, his stance has kind of changed, and he is pro-Israel now. And this is something that some of his supporters, like one of his biggest supporters at the beginning was Lisa Pease, and she's turned because anybody who follows Lisa on Twitter knows she's like the biggest pro-Palestine person out there. She's constantly posted on it, but she turned because of that situation there, and she doesn't support him anymore. So what do you say to the people that, are so passionate about the situation there, and they see it as genocide, but they don't like RFK's stance on that? What do you say to those people?
Well, I agonized about that for months after the October 7th attack and the Israel's brutal response ever since October 7th, and seeing a few interviews with Kennedy where he defends Israel wholeheartedly. You said he kind of turned. I've always heard him being a staunch Israel survivor. So if he ever was more balanced about Palestine, that's news to me. And maybe that's not what you were implying. But
no, but I think at the beginning, though, Bruce, I think he wasn't. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but wasn't he getting some heat at the beginning? I think people were calling him like anti-Semitic even at the beginning when he first.
What do you mean the beginning? The beginning of what?
That's what I was referring to.
The beginning of what?
Well, the beginning of before he even started to run for president, like right when it was starting to come out, I heard people that were calling him anti-Semitic.
Well, this is what I heard.
Okay.
I had no awareness of his Israel position before he declared his candidacy last year on April 19th, I believe. And then in August or September, there was some kerfuffle in the news where he was accused of being anti-Semitic. Oh, a tape leaked of him at a dinner party where he said the COVID virus has indications that it's not as severe on Jews and Asians.
Okay.
And he was accused of being anti-Semitic, and he came out all over the independent media as this unbelievable, complete Israel supporter. And almost instantly, his campaign manager, Dennis Kucinich, quit the campaign and didn't give a reason. And that was in September. And that was my first splinter in my butt about Kennedy. Like, oh, he's less than perfect. Oh, he is just human. Oh, Bruce, you can't, he's not a savior who's absolutely pristine on everything you think, Bruce. And I could live with it. And then after October 7th attack and his blindness to the plight of the Palestinians. And then for the really first time in my life, I did all the reading that I could about it so I could learn the history. And anybody could find JeremyRHammond.com, JeremyRHammond.com. has written books and articles for years about the U.S. involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and documents, he's been on my show 2, maybe 3 times. He documents the history of how horrible Israel has imposed itself on the people there since the 1920s, then the 1930s, and then the 1940s, and then declaring that they're a nation in 1948. And to the United States' great shame, we have allowed that to happen without standing up for something that should be our brand, the right of people to self-govern and have a voice in their government. It is the single convicting proof that we are the United States of hypocrisy.
Right.
And I just want to jump in for a second, Sean, because I know, you know, and you know, as a Jewish person, it's difficult for me because, you know, I do see the genocide that's going on, and it's shameful. And I think, you know, Lisa, I agree with Lisa. And I think, you know, Sean, you mentioned that Lisa's pro-Palestine. I think Lisa's like us is pro-peace. She is. She doesn't want to see what this awful, you know, horrible genocide that's going on anywhere, whether it's, you know, Palestine or anywhere. And I feel the same way. And I feel like this, you know, this is something that we could influence if we wanted to. You know, we could have an influence on what's going on over there, not in the way that we have for the last, you know, so many years. But I think we do have the ability to rein in what's going on there and to promote peace and to work with the two sides to negotiate something. I think it's shameful what's going on. And I just don't know that there are any leaders or potential leaders out there that have a plan, a legitimate plan that could work. I just don't see it. I haven't heard anything that I say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. That could work. Know that exists. Bruce, does RFK have anything that you have heard that, you know, where you say, yes, that's sensible, that could work there?
I've got to dig deeper into his latest postings about his most current statements about the problem there. But no, I haven't seen, up till now, I haven't seen or heard anything except blind justification for Israel's right to defend itself. I am satisfied when I consider what Israel is doing is to never think of the religion of that country, just at the level of a government doing that to a minority nearby, that it just took over their land. It's unacceptable, and it's an infamia. And the Jewish people are being played like suckers and fools by the Zionists who created Israel, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
And Zionism, which rarely got defined in my youth, I was so glad I finally grasped the concept of it, was simply the name of the movement to create a nation just for Jewish people. And as an American, someone steeped in the ideals of the American founding and its history, wait a second. There can be no such thing if the ideals of the Declaration of Independence are true. There can be no such thing as a country just for, we call that religious fanaticism when we are told, well, that's what Iran is. It's a caliphate. It's a nation just for this religion. And that's why they just cut the heads off of people who are not their religion. And it's not okay if they do it. And it's not okay if a Jewish a government pretending to represent Jewish values or Jewish people do it. Jewish values are beautiful. There are so many rabbis and scholars for the last 70 years who talk themselves hoarse, explaining the teachings of Judaism as they understand it. It's got to do with the covenant of being worthy of God's love. It's not about real estate.
Right. You're absolutely right.
And Bruce, you said something really important there. You got to make that distinction between government and, you know, the people. Like, this doesn't, you know, you could criticize the Israeli government, but it doesn't give you the right to to be anti-Semitic and make all these comments and stuff like that. You got to separate the
Yeah.
government that's doing this. And the truth of the matter is, there's really only been one U.S. president that's ever stood up to Israel, and that's JFK, and that can't even be argued. Because look at what Lyndon Johnson did with the USS Liberty. I mean, he went out of his way to make sure that the military didn't find out about that to
Yeah.
protect Israel. And you know, every U.S. president has bowed down to Israel.
And you could
And
argue that Johnson, quote, maybe made Israel do that to the Liberty, because Johnson, according to my reading, wanted an excuse to bomb Cairo in retaliation for claiming Egypt sank our ship, the USS Liberty, in the Mediterranean there in 1967, so that he could ride a wave of popular support to re-election, just like he rode such a wave in 64 after the non-existent Gulf of Tonkin attacks justified
right,
blah, blah,
false
blah, all
flag.
that. Yeah.
Well, we know, Bruce, that Johnson changed every single one of Kennedy's policies just about. I mean, you know, Kennedy was working with Egypt. He was working with Nasser. He wanted to develop a relationship there. And Johnson totally went the other way, like he did everywhere else, you know, and it's just a shame that academia don't teach that in schools.
But
They
here's our,
teach that,
yeah.
you know, there's no difference between Johnson and Kennedy.
Well, that's one of the horrors of the American public school system, not only the content, but the procedures, the behavior, the lifestyle of that incarceration doesn't create people who love freedom. You can't raise children as prisoners and then think they're going to be citizens of a country that love freedom. They never knew it. Freedom's just is an abstraction to most Americans, because we were trained to just sit and do and wait to be told what to do. We don't know what freedom is. We don't know how to stand up for it. We never had it. We never exercised it. We don't want to think for ourselves. We can't critically think. We can consume what we're told to consume. We can be afraid of whom we're told to be afraid of. We can vote for whom we're told to vote for. We can do what we're told. Welcome to America. And back
Right.
to President Kennedy, man, there's the solution. It's the knowledge of just
Yes.
one example of somebody doing something brave and good inspires our deepest nature. And greater love has no man than this, than giving his life for his brother.
Wow.
And you said a key word there, Bruce, knowledge, which I think is very, very scarce these days.
Not to listeners of your show.
Well,
Thank you, Bruce.
let's hope that we we can spread the word a little bit. But you know, one thing that I just want to make sure people understand is that though I object to, you know, Biden's sort of enablement of what's going on in you know, in Palestine right now, I shudder to think of what would happen if we had somebody who was sympathetic and almost envious of the dictators and the fascists in this world. And you know, we don't have to go too far to think to realize who I'm talking about. But
I'm very excited to learn this substantiation of the worst claims about Trump, because I'm ignited and inspired to study for myself. Marianne Williamson is running for the Democrat nomination as well. She suspended her campaign a couple of weeks ago. A few days ago, she unsuspended it. And she has her major thing she talks about are the horrible things that Trump will do along the lines that I've heard here. So I'm very intrigued to get up to speed to that. Now, Trump and Biden are opposite sides of the same clown act in
Sure.
many ways, and even, you know, a doting, lovable old octogenarian like a Biden or a Kamala Harris or a Michelle Obama, if they got in instead of Trump, like Obama proved, will inflict as horrible of fascist dictatorial tyrannies here and abroad as a Trump. But Bill, to your point, yeah, Trump might press the pedal a little harder, but they're all awful from the same intent.
Let me ask you this, Bruce. Let me just ask this, because I've heard a lot of people say this. I've heard people that say, Trump is saying all this stuff. Why wouldn't the CIA just take him out? And my question to this is, they could take him out any minute if they wanted to. They must want him doing what he's doing. And I think,
Oh yeah.
if you have Trump and you have, Biden or whoever's on the Democratic side, you have the people that are so divided and fighting with each other.
Yeah.
They're not questioning anything that the agency is doing.
Oh,
And that would be
exactly.
my answer to it.
Oh yeah, the people, the worst people of the agency and the worst people that steer the agency are laughing on the ground, crying their eyes out, high-fiving each other because the three of us are wasting our time talking about Biden and Trump.
And remember this, Bruce, when Trump, when he was president, and he was saying that he can't wait for the JFK files to be released, and then all this, and then the next day he said I had no choice, and that was after his meeting with the CIA.
Yep.
So whatever they said to him, whatever they did to him, he cowed to them, and Biden and Trump is both done the same thing, and we're gonna have a couple lawyers on in a couple weeks to talk about how both of them really broke the law in the JFK Act and that not releasing these files that are remaining classified, and they should all be declassified. And we're going to have two lawyers that, wrote the book Chokeholds with Jim Diagenio and Professor Blow. So,
Yep.
It's just it's the CIA. I mean, it's like they dictate their own policy and there's no oversight to them.
Right, and it's great to talk about. And at the beginning, you mentioned the how infrequently, if reluctant, politics are discussed on this show, but it's vital. This is a very important conversation, especially among three of us who can do it with civility.
Right, and not arguing and bickering back and forth.
Right,
because
but the biggest challenge is the amount of Americans who still believe the mainstream portrayal of reality, because I often feel I'm 10,000 miles higher than that, meaning presidents have been such whores, puppets, and criminals since Kennedy,
yes,
that they're all in my rearview mirror. I wouldn't waste my time thinking about presidential politics were not Kennedy hovering and making a great attempt to get into the race, and he is in the race. And here's the other point. What the most tangible thing many people tell me to do is go to your local city council meetings for the next year and just watch, listen, and learn. And the promise is you will see how quickly you could get up and have 3, 4, 5 minutes to talk about anything you want.
right.
And then you're going to want to say something that you could affect at the local level. The bottom line is the big powers are so corrupt from the top down. Our most instant recourse is from the bottom up, which is what are the rules and regs of economics and trade and what the price of anything costs at the local level that we can impact, because it walks right into what's happening at the schools. Are they being mandated to do very unhealthy things like stay home, lock down, wear a mask, or socially distant, let alone take a fucking shot without their parents' permission? If enough truth lovers just made a commitment, like, I'm sorry, every other Wednesday night, I have to go to the council meeting just to see what I might be able to say. Enough of us are going to start, have a crusade. Like, oh no, I've got a plan. I'm talking about this month and next month and next month and next month, and try to have some. And before you know it, enough of those truth lovers are going to want to throw their hat in the ring for the city council position here, the city council position there.
Well, Bruce, I said before on the show, and I'll say it again because it's worth repeating, but when they assassinated JFK, I mean, they didn't just kill the man, they killed the office of the presidency.
Well, they killed democracy is what they did.
Pretty much, yes.
We don't have we don't have a true democracy.
No.
We have a two-part. We have basically, if you walked into a restaurant and they said you can have anything on the menu as long as it's a hamburger or a plate of pasta. That's what we have. Mm-hmm. We don't have a true choice. We have, and what's so important about Kennedy's candidacy is smashing that. And I just don't see, because we've had this for so long and there just doesn't seem to be any way out of it. Tell me, how do we get out of this? How do we do it? How do we get enough people to buck the system? and to say, this is what we want. We don't want an old man who represents this or an old man who represents this. We want somebody who has some balls, somebody who has some brains, somebody who has an idea and who understands what democracy is and how to help people. How do we do that?
Not to be flippant, but what occurs to me quickly and easily is go to this local city councils. Second of all is read a great book about Kennedy's administration and the reasons behind his assassination. And maybe even most of all is study the hell out of four things: the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and maybe most importantly, the Federalist Papers, where the newly drafted Constitution was publicly debated in articles printed in many newspapers over the course of a year or so, describing the history of how hard it is for democracies to survive, the value, the importance of a democratic republic, which is what we are, and also the tendency of human nature to be bullied and intimidated by the rich who want to capture governments for their own horrible, selfish purposes. Knowledge, in a word, like you admired before.
Knowledge is power.
Well, Bruce, let's get into that. Let's get into some of the knowledge, because to me, unless the truth gets out about JFK, I mean, I don't see how we move on. Like, and it's got to start academia. These young kids in high school and kids in college, they got to start learning the truth about what happened.
Yep.
And they got to learn the truth about JFK, because when we have Professor Blow on, and he did a study on academia, and he's from Canada, remember, and he studied how American professors and teachers are teaching not just the assassination, but the presidency and the misinformation about JFK. And we talk all the time about this Marilyn Monroe nonsense and the mafia nonsense and all this other discredited, character assassination that they have. But let's talk a minute or two here about JFK, his values and American ideas that he stood for and the ideals that he stood for.
Well, they're vital to learn because it's an example of all of the above that I just said. And to see anybody act heroically inspires especially the young. And the young are starving for meaning and purpose and in their lives. And they still resonate with, I think, the rightness of good and the horribleness of evil with their idealism and their energy versus, the exhaustion and cynicism that can creep into a guy my age. And it's so funny. When you first started framing the question, I thought, yeah, JFK is a good string to pull, but so are some other doors like 9/11 or the disease of the last 4 years to expose the truth of how horrible really things are, because there's value in knowing, wait a minute, the house is on fire. How can you sit around and play video games if the house is on fire? But that's so negative and horrifying because it instantly raises the question, what do we do? Well, you study JFK to see, well, what did this guy do when he had the opportunity to work as an American on some real problems? And it can absolutely change their lives. So just in terms of, the first example would be for a listless country is to study JFK to see an example of someone who aspired to something, who wanted something. He wanted to improve the lives first of his constituents as a congressman of the 11th district near Boston in Massachusetts. And after 3 terms there, or 6 years as a congressman, he dared to take on a popular, entrenched incumbent senator from Massachusetts in 1951 and outworked him. And that's how Kennedy won every election that he ever won: 46, 48, 1950, 1952, 1956, and 1960. He wanted it as much as he could. So there's your, how to be successful, how to succeed in business without really trying. So you have to know what you want. Right. And you have to work really hard at it. So number one for Americans is to inspire in Americans to want to be Americans. And an American is someone who says, give me liberty or give me death, who looks at the current situation and says, this is unacceptable. I got to do everything I can to turn it around. And then, because we're dealing with humans, JFK is a walking personification of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Okay? because he became beloved because he developed the people skills. He had a lot of natural talent, but he also worked hard to develop public speaking skills and
Right.
also people skills because he knew I want these people to like me and I have to ask for their vote. That's how anyone can win an election. You have to be likable. In the split second you think that you're likable, you have to quickly stick out your hand and say, Will can I have your vote? You have to ask for what you want. Can I have your vote? And the history of American politics shows to this day, the candidate who does that more than the opposition wins. Because come election day, the old farmer goes into town and you might have been a lifelong Republican, but the Democrat made his way to his farm, chatted with him about the cows and the weather,
Right.
and stuck out his hand and asked for his vote. And the guy thought, all right. So that's it. So that's another tactic to glean from Kennedy. And
Well,
that's at the very personal level, because we're talking about authors and books here that at the policy level, we
right.
could fill 6 hours about the policy, and maybe we'll get into that, and maybe we should. But just at a very human level, this impacts how we live our lives, because we're only going to aspire to great things, Sean and Bill, if we're enjoying life and if we feel like we have a chance, that we've got some capability, that I can learn these skills that I'm hearing about.
Bruce, let's go a little deep on that. Like, talk a little bit about how hard JFK worked to learn about his opponents and his adversaries, on the campaign trail, and despite all these physical ailments that he had.
Well, he primarily was learning about the constituents, the areas where he was campaigning. He wanted to learn about the issues in the struggles of the people he would be addressing, let's say at speeches. And if when he learned about his quote unquote opponents when it came time to negotiate with them, and that's what he learned as a legislator in the halls of Congress for 14 years before he became president, the deal making. And if you're not trying to take advantage of someone, you can become a good deal maker. If you're not relying on bribery to force your will on people, you could become a very, very good deal maker. And that's not to say Kennedy didn't do deep research on his opposition in case they, threw mud at him. The gloves could come off, and there were a couple of times where he said, very, very, harsh things about his opponents, because he had to, because there are plenty of accounts that say, the public image of Bobby as ruthless and Kennedy as this warm-hearted guy is flipped. That at his core, JFK was a very, very calculating intellect.
Right.
And I don't mean to make that sound ominous or scary or evil or mean or anything like that. It's part of my infatuation with him, because I can't talk objectively about him, because I've been studying him for many, many years now, and I'm just enamored at his greatness. Because, and you mentioned it in the last question, and I forget what it was, but his intense desire to learn. Here's an anecdote that comes to mind. A few years ago, I had a 95-year-old neighbor, and I chatted with him on his front lawn when he was out there walking his dog. And that's when I learned he had been an airline executive in the 1950s. And maybe he was a lobbyist, because he had meetings with Lyndon Johnson when he was a senator. And my neighbor's name was Arthur. He said, Johnson, and he also was at parties with these people. And he said, Johnson was a world-class charmer and a world-class con man. Arthur told me that when Johnson would ask a congressman to change his vote and the congressman didn't really want to, Johnson would show the congressman a picture of the congressman in a compromising position that had been given to him by J. Edgar Hoover, and the congressman would come around. And then Arthur said, I also briefed Kennedy a couple of times on some things, and he said Kennedy was very impressive. He said he really listened, and then he would explain back what he had heard. Most senators pretend to listen, and then Arthur repeated, Kennedy was very impressive. That's just one personal anecdote. Books are filled with stories like that.
Well, see, Bruce, to me,
Yeah.
what you just said there in the last few minutes should be saying this to schools all over the country. Like you should that should be something that should be taught in high schools and even in colleges and universities across the country. What JFK stood for and everything you just said there. That would that should be in you should be a guest at some of these universities and say that what you just said right there because I think it was perfect.
Well, thank you, and I'll take that to heart because uh, I'm here talking to you guys because I fell in love with Kennedy and fell in love with trying to write something great about him that became the biggest chapter in my book. Here it comes, the shameless plug: God School, 9/11, and JFK. The
Which
lies
is
that
on
are
our bookshop, Bruce. It's
woohoo!
on our bookshop. You could get it right on our bookshop. Yep.
Yeah, and the subtitle: The lies that are killing us and the truth that sets us free. And um, yeah, he's the gift that keeps on giving. But back to, what else about him? Because it's such a loss. I mean, do you want to talk about the assassination now? Because
Well,
the impact, or
he had also. I just want to mention how physically he had so many
oh,
problems
that was
too.
it. That was it. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And in
Um,
spite of all that, he was such a
yeah.
a warrior on the campaign trail.
And we will be right back. DK's Corner, located on 802 East Lackawanna Avenue in Oliphant, Pennsylvania. Visit DK's Corner for hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, and delicious breakfast, including breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos. And take it from me, the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570 209 0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. Check out DK's Corner, Oliphant's little hoagie shop. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. That's DK's Corner in Oliphant, Pennsylvania. Are you thinking about selling your house? Well, Bob Connors, a realtor at Christian Saunders Real Estate, says, I can't sell your house, but I sure as heck can market it and get it from sell to sold. Call Bob today for great marketing and to get a ton of eyeballs on your house. Are you in the market to buy a home? Not sure where to start? If it looks like something you shouldn't buy, Bob's going to tell you that. Think you can't buy a house or have no idea where to start? Been there, done that. Bob will get you going in the right direction. You can reach Bob at 570-614-3624 or 570-335-9000. And you can find Bob on Facebook at Bob Connors-Realtor. Whether you call Bob or not, please remember, stay awesome, all you awesome humans, and be kind to each other. Bob Connors, the realest real estater. And thanks to Bob Connors and Christian Saunders Real Estate for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
Well, in many ways, the culture rewarded those qualities. In many ways, he typified what was masculinity back then in the most healthy and necessary sense, because we have to be able to defend the women and children from violent animals and from marauders. So there's something beautiful and necessary about man's capacity for violence, equally as woman's capacity to nurture and mother. Let's put that on the table. But you have to be civilized. Martha Washington heard someone compliment her husband, George Washington, saying he's so mild-mannered. You're such a lucky woman. And she said, he has a ferocious temper, exquisitely contained. Okay, so it's this kind of self-control. How Kennedy was racked by bad health and injuries and pain his entire life, came close to dying a number of times, and you just wouldn't know it unless you were really, really around him. And then after he died, in some memoirs or interviews, even people like Bobby, his brother, were quoted as, you wouldn't know it except every now and then you would notice that he was a little more terse and maybe a little little pinched in his eyes, and that's when he would be probably having a day of excruciating pain. His brother Bobby said he probably lived half of his days with really bad pain from his back, particularly. Um, and yet he got up early to campaign. He walked miles. He stood in the freezing cold. He stayed up late doing whatever it took. He wore himself down to exhaustion a number of times. And yes, he was pumped up with lots of medication, some of which that have horrible connotations today, like amphetamines or speed or whatever. And he gave his life 100% to his endeavor and really for the country. And we think we got problems, and look how hard he worked selflessly, selflessly, and to disparage him by saying, well, he never had to work for money a day in his life, that doesn't mean anyone would automatically come close to working as hard as he did.
Exactly.
For what he did.
In fact, just the opposite. I mean,
exactly.
most people who have money like that, they would just, they would sit back, they would enjoy their life, enjoy, the fruits of of his father's, labor, and just.
But none of them did. None of the Kennedy.
None of them did. They all felt
they felt the sense of responsibility.
Exactly.
And I give that credit to Joseph Sr. and Rose, the parents.
Yes.
To raise a brood that across the board competed to help and be excellent in their efforts at helping. Unbelievable. So, metaphorically, how can I apply that? I think okay, this is what it comes down to. At its base, we're talking about people who took the opportunity of a human life, and this is what they did with it. What am I going to do with mine? What am I going to do with mine? And that's why reading about heroic heroes like Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr., etc., are vital and also missing from the curriculum. So this is the service your show serves. This is the service my efforts hopefully do too, is because is the glass half full or is it half empty? Is life good, or does it suck and then you die? And whatever you choose, that is what it's going to be for you.
Well, Bruce, let's talk about the assassination for a minute, and not really the specifics of it, but the impact of it and how, the psychological damage and destruction of the country, as the main goal of the assassination, and how you mentioned, how he may have been set up by deep ancient string pullers, and even you said the remnants of the Knight Templars, and let's talk about, these secret societies and the Skull and Bones and the John Birch Society and the Masons and the power that these groups have, because Kennedy always said that, secrecy is repugnant in a free thinking society. And he never joined any of these secret societies. He never was in that, despite being, a one percenter and despite being extremely wealthy, he never joined these secret groups like basically all the other ones did, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all of them. Let's talk about that for a minute.
It's important because let's use Skull and Bones as a great example. Okay. They were founded at Yale University in 1832, and to all outward appearances, it's just like a fraternity. Well, I don't know if they ever called themselves a fraternity, and of course they had to keep all their stuff secret. But I believe all the fraternities back then endeavored to keep their protocols and their doing, secret to a large extent, as probably as part of the fun and however fraternities compete on campuses. But from the inception, Skull and Bones and many others such orders or societies had much worse goals in mind. And from 1832 on, a lot of its graduates helped each other advance in life. 15 members every year graduated from Yale. Just 15, starting in 1832. But they became Attorney Generals of the United States, Secretary of States of the United States, the presidents of major corporations in the late 1800s. First Skull and Bones president was William Howard Taft at the early 1900s. The second Skull and Bones president was George Herbert Walker Bush in the
Mm-hmm.
1980s and 90s. The third Skull and Bones president was George W. Bush in 2001. In 2004, he ran against his cousin, Skull and Bones member John Kerry.
Mm-hmm.
And they, and I've learned tons about them from Chris Milligan, the publisher at Trine Day, who published my book, who started studying conspiracy theories and secret societies in the 1970s because his father, ex-CIA, told him in 1968, we need to talk about the Vietnam War. It's all about drugs. There are these secret societies behind it all. They're out to opiate your entire generation, and communism's all a sham. Their same secret societies are behind it. To them, it's all a big game. And 19-year-old Chris Milligan thought his father was nuts. He'd never heard anything like that before. So now, fast forward 50 years, I helped Chris with a podcast. People check it out at trineday.com. The podcast called The Journey. And Chris has published about 180 books in the last 20 years. And I have participate like Ed McMahon, like a co-host kind of just, and have my mind blown by this scenario. According to Chris, Kennedy's assassination was set up decades in advance. They wanted to kill a president to traumatize a nation again because they saw how well that worked when Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. And that generation was destroyed by war, and its survivors were hooked on drugs from all their injuries in the Civil War, and they wanted to get the band back together and do it again in the 1960s. For the gut punch that such a public execution would be, to go whole hog into Vietnam. And Chris said, you used to join the army or get drafted to fight a war, and you fought until the war was over. But in Vietnam, you had a tour of duty that lasted just 1 year. I think just 1 year. Maybe it was two. I think it was one. And then they sent you home. So they were cycling in young Americans to traumatize them with war and get hooked on drugs, particularly heroin, as many as possible. Not all of them did, but they certainly were all traumatized. And the revolts and protests about that war were shown on TV and radio pretty much every single day back then to tear this country apart. Because when a population is scared, we'll cling to the first bully who rises up and says, I've got the answer, I've got the plan, rally around me. And they point a big finger at, they're the enemy, they're the cause of all of our problems. So business people were told the hippies were the problems, and hippies were told adults are the problem. And we get pitted against each other. And I've heard him interview, and I've got friends now who've written books, Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, their book series, The Valediction, and many articles. And people can find out all about this at valediction.net, valediction.net. We do a monthly roundtable exploring Kennedy's peace plan and also the economics of peace, economic justice that could be created by the economics of Henry George. But what Paul and Liz have brought forth is studying Paul's Fitzgerald family history. Paul is a Fitzgerald of the Fitzgeralds that the Kennedy Fitzgeralds are Fitzgeralds going back to Ireland. And what they show is that when the Knights Templar were destroyed by a papal edict way back then by the Pope, by the Roman Catholic Pope, that there's evidence that at least by the 1940s and 50s, embedded in the CIA were people who considered themselves the descendants of the Knights Templar and have grooming Kennedy into the presidency. Chris Milligan said Kennedy was allowed to be president for the sake of this unbelievable public ritual sacrifice, replicating an historic thing that happened all the time, the killing of the king. People need to research the killing of the king and see the history of the killing of the king, because his blood then fertilizes our crops. But it also, if you kill the king, you usurp his power. And that's when these cabals behind the scenes, I think, at least metaphorically, stepped onto the stage because they didn't cover their tracks, Sean and Bill. They want us to know that the official story is horrible, that they could kill our president and do it right in our face and taunt us with the feeling we're powerless to protect our own president. We're powerless to put a good president in. Any good person, if you try to stand up to these horrible, evil forces, you're going to get killed, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we've been blithering idiots, traumatized chickens with our heads cut off, frightening. And I don't want to sound mocking because I've got great compassion for what scares humans because I'm a human and I struggle with what scares me and the sense of self-esteem and what kind of power, capability, and how to be effective and how do I love life and who's my enemy and all these things. So that's the short answer about all that.
And Bruce, that a
lot of interesting stuff. Go ahead, Bill.
It brings up an interesting question. Thanks, Sean. Brings up an interesting question, Bruce. Do you ever get scared? I mean, do you get scared that
I manage fear 24/7? My life is fear management. I'm constantly, I've got this little engine of anxiety and fear that works 24/7. And I've psychoanalyzed myself back to my childhood. And it's just, whatever seems composed and glib, that's just also testimony to just human nature. Like whatever genetic material I'm made out of, or whatever was innocent in my youth that fell in love with puppies and kittens playing with each other and, and nice music and having a good time. That's what gets me through. But I'm often a nervous wreck.
Wow. And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah. And there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy, Tom's philosophy. It's great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
I don't know, Sean.
Well, a lot of the interesting stuff there, Bruce. And, I've always said that, anybody who ever looked into the Kennedy assassination just for a half hour, it's pretty obvious that Oswald was a patsy. Anybody, you don't even have to, you could have half a brain and you figure it out. So it was obvious that, they didn't care that people were going to find out. They wanted people to know because they were going to control the narrative. So the official story was always going to be, that Oswald was the assassin. And,
Right.
To this day, the media still portrays that awful lie, and academia does as well.
But think
Which,
about Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men. You can't
yes,
handle the truth. You're alluding to the truth that one year after another, year by year, America, those who were in the know, who followed the news, who tried to stay current with current events, we saw, I was a kid, but adults at the time saw this person die, this person die, this person die, this person die. I'm not talking about the assassinations of Malcolm X or Bobby Kennedy or Martin Luther King. I'm talking about America saw people close to the assassination who were saying like this, the official story stinks. So we saw this cover up.
right,
And that's why in 1975, the investigations into Watergate brought forth evidence of the CIA doing bad things, not only overseas but here.
right.
So in January 75, one of the first investigations into the criminal activities or the activities of the CIA. And in January, dumb President Ford
Hmm.
said, among some reporters, he was asked, "Well, what are the horrible things that could come out if the CIA gets investigated?" Because the government didn't want the CIA investigated, and
Exactly.
Ford said assassinations. He
Assassinations, he
thought it was
said,
off
yeah.
the record, but
Right,
it got public. So
right.
January, February, the New York Times and the nightly news is talking about, did the CIA commit assassinations? And March 6th, Robert Groden and Dick Gregory show the Zapruder film to the American people for the first time, and we see his head go back into the left violently. So now we see, oh, we've been lied to. So that was the nadir, the bottom point, the catastrophic, and we haven't recovered in distrust in government and the media, because that's where Nixon took us. Well, maybe Johnson did too with the lies of Vietnam. Yes, yes, yes. Yep. So it all started with Kennedy. That's where we went off the cliff. And we
And
have been inflicted with reasons to hate our government, which is synonymous with subconsciously hating ourselves. And that's why you can do what you want to the American people. I don't see uprisings happening. I'm not advocating uprisings, but I'm saying that's the extent of our problem.
let me ask you about a secret society, Bruce. What do you know about the Bohemian Club?
More than most,
Because
since
that's a
like
fascinating, I believe Nixon and Reagan were both members, correct?
well, there's a picture. They at least attended. They attended at least once because I've seen a photograph of them sitting at a little outdoor table listening to a man give a little lecture. So yeah, they went there at least once, and maybe in biographies, it's been written about that they were there. But
And
that's just
how would you compare their some of the stuff that we know about what's been going on in that club to satanic rituals?
well, they definitely performed rituals. Alex Jones famously snuck in with a camera in the late '90s, early
Right.
2000s, and released a great film about it, or that footage about it. And it's just another place where the movers and the shakers meet and do things in secret, like the Bilderberg conference every single year that was denied for decades until
Decades,
finally
yeah.
it got
Trilateral Commission's another one.
exposed. Yeah, yeah. And but the freaky stuff about Bilderberg, excuse me, Bohemian, is that goes back into the 1800s, and it
Right.
was just men who were the bankers and the corporate owners and the politicians, maybe up to that same thing, the cabinet level, maybe presidents. I think I read Taft went there, and that corroborates the evidence and accounts that their plotting and planning is subterranean, and it is nefarious, and it is psychopathic. It is along the lines that they consider themselves uh, endowed to lead us. And you remind me, this is well documented in two books by Jim Mars, The Rise of the Fourth Reich,
Yeah.
and the other one is Ruled by Secrecy. And I was blown away to find,
Great author.
and
He
then
was
finding,
unbelievable.
right, and then finding others who study the same stuff, all leads to the same thing. The the horrible people behind these current events are affiliated with secret societies, often like Skull and Bones, and they did things like the Federal Reserve, which co-opted our money. And the Masons are also implicated here in the United States from the 1800s and even earlier. And then the Illuminati infiltrated
I
the
was just going to
Masons.
ask you, Bruce, the most infamous of all of these secret societies is the Illuminati.
Well,
And
wait, you're gonna love this because
go ahead.
you just keep Jim Mars's two books, Rule by Secrecy and The Rise of the Fourth Reich, documents how there's a chain of connection going back to the Illuminati, to the Knights Templar, and to Egypt, and then to Babylon, and then to Sumer. And this is where it all goes to the interpretations of hieroglyphics from the Sumerian empire or dynasty thousands of years ago, with a tale that aliens came down to Earth, changed some of the Neanderthals or the apes, and created the human race. And the current psychopathic ritual performing Satanists, who are the top percentage of the world today, are a legacy of them who obviously think that they can do things to us that they're better than us, and the evidence is that they've got some belief that they might be an anointed race or just a descendant race from alien created, and we were literally the slave race that was created. They either believe that or they're happy to let stand and leak out evidence to indicate that they believe it to mess with our heads. And those are
Yeah.
rabbit holes that a lot of amateur podcasts and conspiracy exploring podcasts go down. Often
Right, exactly.
and I'm interested in prosecuting crimes.
Yes.
Why a psychopath does what they do is fascinating after they've been brought to justice.
Well, Bruce, I came across a document one time. I was looking through a lot of them, CIA declassified documents, and I came across something where the CIA, they were using the Illuminati as kind of a spook story, and kind of release it into the public of doing things that the CIA was actually doing, and to blame it on this spook story, the Illuminati, and this
Yes.
shadowy group that's out there, and it was actually CIA operations.
Well, here's the challenge, and I've learned this really at Chris Milligan's side through 3 years of conversations and reading his books and stuff like that. Intelligence ops specifically often get written with stories inside of stories.
Exactly.
So what the CIA in any document said about the Illuminati, yes, it stands, but parsing the truth, who said it? Was it Wisner, Jerome Wisner, or Wisner's Wurlitzer, the wilderness of mirrors that is the intelligence field? And that's just the intelligence agencies that we're talking about, American and British influence. When you remember that every country's got not only intelligence agencies, but secret societies going back centuries as well. And sometimes they collude, sometimes they compete, and they create cover stories over cover stories. Random anecdote that I think is related. I've heard Chris Milligan say in Dealey Plaza when Kennedy was shot, there were many, 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 many intelligence operatives, and assassins, professional assassins, who were all brought in, who maybe didn't know why they were there. Maybe they were told a cover story of why they were there. So that it's all a swirling bunch of accusations. So it's how they all could control each other, because Sean and Bill, I know you were there. Well, Bruce, we know you were there, but I didn't do anything. Oh, but I heard you did. But that's made up. Maybe you made it up. Maybe you were involved. Maybe not. Like Richard Case Nagel, you know his story, the man who knew too much, right?
Sure.
You know that story?
Absolutely.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't, he was also manipulated like Oswald as an agent for a number, maybe a double, triple agent. And 2 months before Kennedy's assassination, he went into a bank in Texas and he got out a money order or something, and then he pulled out a gun. He shot 2 bullets into the wall, slowly went outside to get arrested, and basically said, I just don't want to be in Dallas in November or something.
Yeah, he was
like
taking
that.
himself out of the picture completely.
Yeah, it ruined his life, but he survived. So
Well, he survived, Bruce, but he ended up suspiciously dying when the ARB came out.
Okay, yeah.
You remember that? Are you familiar with that story?
I think you just reminded me. Yes, I'm
Yeah,
gonna say
because
I had heard that
he was
before.
going to be called to testify before them, or I guess it wouldn't be testified, but they were going to ask him questions, and you know, the day before, I believe he died in suspicious circumstances. So
Yeah.
yeah, Nigel's a very fascinating character.
Yeah, and that was a great book by Dick Russell, who wrote RFK Jr.'s recent biography and the new movie that came out about that. To bring it all full circle here.
Yeah, I mean, this was a great conversation, Bruce. I know we kept you a long time here, but this was great conversation. And yeah, we kind of went in directions we didn't even plan on really going into.
Yeah, that we normally don't go into, but
Yeah, we normally don't get into the politics, but I just felt it was important to just let people know that they do have choices.
right.
You know, you don't
You
have to
can
go down the same
confidently
choice.
you can confidently talk about politics, Sean and Bill, the way you handled it. It's actually I'm begging you to, because by 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 training us culturally, don't talk about religion or politics. We are ignorant and idiots and children yelling at each other, throwing our poop at each other when it comes to
Right.
these things, because we
Right.
don't know as adults how to have a civilized conversation like this. I encourage you to do it all the time.
Well, the problem is, Bruce, is that a lot of these conversations you see them on social media, the back and forth arguments, they're not even political arguments. They're just nonsense, you know,
Yep.
one
Yep.
hating the other and just back and forth
Yep.
garbage. And
Yep.
it doesn't do anything. It doesn't, doesn't push anything forward. And,
Well,
that's
that's
what we try to stay away from.
right, and that's why I said, Sean, it really has nothing to do with politics, right?
No,
It's
it
just
doesn't.
it's
But
hate.
it serves the purpose of alienating us from politics,
Sure.
because if
Distraction.
politics is the Jerry Springer show where people are throwing chairs at each other, I want nothing to do with it.
And
If it's a
that's
babbling, incoherent old president who I want nothing to do with it. If it's this Trumpian, egotistical, unbelievably unsavvy guy who does nothing but divide the country with every word he says, who's boorish and insulting, I want nothing to do with politics. So you are the antidote. These conversations are the antidote, because we have to talk about politics if we're going to be a society with a citizenry that can participate and vote and do anything effectively.
Bruce, the
right.
more I think about it, you know what? I think Trump himself is an intel operation. I mean, I really think there might be something there.
It's a good explanation for how absolutely committed he is to
Right.
being divisive and calling people names until there's a food fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
And you're right, Bruce. It does discourage people from participating in what is such a privilege and such an amazing thing that we get to do that so many other countries would die for and have died for.
Yep.
And that's the right to choose your own leaders, to determine
Yep.
your leadership. And again, I say, even though we do have a choice, it's not it's just not enough. We need to everybody needs to get involved. If you are able to vote, get off your ass, get out there. It doesn't take that much of your time. Do it, vote. And like you said, Bruce, go to your local town hall, go to your township, make your voice heard, make yourself a pain in the ass, but do it, because it's the only way that we are going to reclaim our democracy. It's the only way we're going to turn things around. And if we want to shape this country in a way that's going to survive, we need to do that. And Bruce, you articulate that so wonderfully, and we're so thankful to have you on.
Thank you for the work you guys do and the conversations you facilitate. They're great. It's an honor to talk to both of you.
Yeah, Bruce, I got to say, this was probably maybe the most fun we had doing a podcast episode.
Great.
This was fantastic tonight. So thank you very much. We appreciate it, buddy. This has been great.
You just gave me goosebumps because you've had some dominating,
we have
wonderful
had some good
podcasts.
guests, but I'll tell you, this was a great conversation, Bruce.
Good
and
conversation.
I think it's important, and I think I'm interested to hear how our listeners are going to receive this, respond to this. I know one listener in Dallas that'll probably hate this whole episode, but he hates our episode. But he listens
every week.
I'm interested to see, how our listeners, and even some of our other authors that we've had on, like Lisa and Jim and Rick Otto, and I wonder, how they would, how they're going to receive this, and respond to this.
I am too, because I love all of them. I've had on my show Lisa, Jim DiEugenio, Paul Blow, Rick Otto, Monica Wisak. I love everyone that
They're all great.
You've attracted, yeah.
They are great. Every one of them.
All right, Bruce. Well, I'm going to say this because I appreciate you being here, but that's enough out of you, Bruce the Torres.
You're speaking my language.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you
for both. Yeah.
All right. Appreciate it. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.